Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January 22nd, 2025 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this virtual format today. For work sessions like this one, there is no opportunity for public comment. Those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our city website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcasts and meeting materials webpage of the City of Eugene website. Thank you all again for joining us today. I call the January 22nd, 2025 City Council work session to order, and I will now turn it over to the City Manager to introduce our first topic.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that. Our first topic is going to be to revisit our council budget priority discussion, mostly around the process and timeline. As you might recall, last week, we started into this conversation. The plan was to continue today with that, and we've delayed that, and we've shifted that back to February 10th when all of you can be in attendance and we can be in person. So I thought what I could do today is use the time to talk a little bit about some things that need to happen, some reflections I've had on the last work session, and in particular about how that relates to our timelines. So before I jump into that, I'm going to do another reminder that I did at the beginning of the last work session, which is there's a lot at stake with these conversations. There's a lot of people paying attention. Our staff are paying attention. Our community partners are really starting to communicate with us, pay closer attention in the community. So as we walk through it, I'll try to be as thoughtful as I can in the statements, because we start talking about exercises and dollars and just remembering that there's people behind all of those. All right, this tool. All right, so when we met the last time, we were really talking about this process, and I'm focusing in on the end of this. One of the things that, we did a lot of context last week. I'm not going to do all of that again. And you were able to determine that $11.5 million is the target that you want to see, what might make that up. And it's really the second part of determining, should we allocate that differently? Should we hold some services more harmless than others? That's a little bit where we're stuck, and it's hard to move beyond that and get into the next pieces without that. I also showed this slide last time, and what I didn't show is the budget, reminding everybody that the reason we're in these conversations we are today is really the policy direction that was given to me when we adopted the 23 through 25 budget. And there's a reminder that budget, in addition to all of the things it did, it really is as related to the general fund. There's three main things I've been talking about. That budget included over $20 million worth of reductions, so cuts to the general fund. A lot of those were ongoing. Some of those were one time, which means we have to solve for them again. But we did that. We implemented that. The second piece was reallocating some of our existing general fund to address three urgent community needs around downtown, around impacts to our public spaces, and our alternative response. We've implemented those. In fact, I think we have a workshop coming up where we're going to talk about downtown and the public spaces and give you an update on how those are going. So where we are is really with this 8.3 of new revenue and a question, because we haven't implemented that. And that's really the path we were going down when we paused to talk about, okay, if we don't do new revenue, then maybe we need to increase the level of cuts. But we're kind of in this space of not knowing what's going with that. There's definitely some conflict in terms of how we do this amongst us. I would say, and this is just a sampling of some of the things I've heard, that we just need to, do a much deeper engagement about priorities, deeper engagement with each other, with the community. Heard others say, we know what the priorities are, we just need to set them and make the cuts. I've heard some say, we just need new revenue, let's go with our current policy direction, we should pass the fire fee. And then you have me over here saying, you know what, actually, we need to build the budget, which is more nuts and bolts, but it's a legal responsibility I have. It's one of my prime responsibilities to you. And in my reflections, recognizing that that I've probably let this go farther than I should have. And so that's where we're heading with this conversation. I did show this, slide about how we go from sort of strategies to a proposed budget to adopted budget. I didn't include the timelines last time. So typically, we're getting our forecast information pretty dialed in by November, early December. And that's when our team is starting to pull together strategies for, could be potentially surplus strategies, but it's mostly been reduction strategies based on our history of consistently needing to do that. And then we have this time between, I would say, and these things fudge a little bit, but February and mid-April where we're dialing all that in, we're putting everything into our systems, our financial systems, balancing it all, publishing it all, advertising it, doing all of that work so we can be prepared at the end of April, typically to start with the budget committee process. And then we have, a month and a half of that before council adopts the budget. So there are really very specific deadlines. And here we are, we're kind of at the end of January. We're really at that deadline. And I have some concerns about that. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. It doesn't have a lot of words, has some icons, but I have a lot of words. So this would be here's where we're heading with this. As I think about it, you have a couple of choices. You have a lot of choices, but really a couple of choices ahead of you. One is you move forward with a new revenue. You haven't taken that off the table yet, and that's why I'm putting it out here. As a reminder, that new revenue was going to include $2 million worth of new fire services, $8 million worth of stabilization. And even with that, there's $3.5 million worth of general fund cuts that I would be building into the budget because that's, if we're looking at 11.5. What you also get with that is more of a special revenue fund, kind of a utility model for fire services, that those $10 million move into that account. And that is a fire stabilization account going forward. The other option is you can say, we don't want to do that. We don't want the services. We don't want the stabilization. We don't want the special revenue. What we really want is the $11.5 million worth of general fund cuts. And the next decision, here's how we want you to allocate that if you don't want me to just go do what the city manager would typically do, right? Don't use the plans and processes before. These are the allocations we want. So that's kind of like big picture where we're at. You're going to meet on February 10th for 2 hours. I actually need to know the answer to that. And I know that's really close, but I'll tell you that one of the things that I've reflected on with this is we really needed the decision about whether we were going to move forward with a new revenue or not. We really needed that decision really in November. We weren't able to get there. So we pushed it to December. We really needed it by December. And there was some discomfort with that. And there was some pushback to that, feedback about that. And you asked to move it to January. And I really trusted that we were going to be able to do that. And we're now moving it to February. So we've definitely moved beyond my comfort zone of being able to hit the mark. And so when we come on February 10th, we're going to have 2 scenarios for you. Those are the 2 that you directed. One is the $11.5 million allocated across the departments in their current percent mix that we have now. And the second one is that $11.5 million spread, but in a way that protects the core most essential functions of police and fire. So both of those will be things we consider. If on February 10th, you're not able to say we want to move forward with a new revenue or we want to go forward with cuts and allocations, I'm going to move forward with a budget. And what that budget's going to look like is based on no decisions from you. we'll have an $11.5 million set of cuts. That will be an all-in budget like we've always done. Every department will be represented. I can't say it'll be specifically down the line of 37% police. I mean, I don't know that it'll be exact, but you'll see reductions across all of the departments. I put everything's on the table because you included things to consider that I might actually reduce or take out and say we're going to do that with one-time dollars. And you still have an option based on that. If you are continuing this conversation and you still want to be more clear about what your priorities are, or you want to do a fire fee, you still have the option to amend the budget. I'll talk about that in a minute. The reason I'm saying this is like we have to build the budget, and I'm getting concerned that you won't actually be able to come to a decision on February 10th, and that's going to put all of us in a real strong kind of difficult position to recover from if we don't just move forward. So I'm saying all this because I don't want there to be any surprises. I don't want you to feel like that I'm moving on without you, but there will be motions in your packet that there'll be a motion to, do you want to do this? Do you want to do the fire fee? Do you want to do the cuts? There'll be some motions in your packet. Without that, we'll move forward. So what that means, we did this during COVID. The amended general fund, it's an amendment to the budget. It's not a new amended budget. So it's an actual amendment to the budget. When we did it in COVID, it was about a 24-page document, very much focused on the general fund. And there were some other funds that were impacted that you necessarily have to kind of true up. But that is a possibility. I don't want to lead us down a road of getting into a place where we're building budgets and amending them because it's not super efficient. Not the best way for me to run the business, but I think given the situation, it's the only option I can see that allows us to continue to do the work and move forward and meet our legal obligations and allow you to continue conversations should you want to. The last slide is sort of my first reflection on that was sort of wrapped up in that last slide is I feel like I should have been more prepared to say, hey, we're moving on with this budget and we're going to have to build it because now I've put staff in a really difficult position of having to make all those timelines. The second reflection I have is really around this concept of value. And I've been thinking a lot about that because in your conversations, the last conversation, there was a lot of discussion about what's valuable, what's not valuable. And what I'm needing to do as your sort of chief administrative officer is I'm spending some time with staff that heard those conversations, and some feel very valued and some feel very not valued. And I'm working through that and trying to assure our team that all of the services we provide are valuable. And so I've been thinking about that. When I was thinking of the example I gave is, there's some things that are just inherently more valuable, but I might not value them as much. And the example I gave is silver and gold. Gold is clearly more valuable. If you take it and you're going to sell it, it holds more value, but actually I'd much prefer to have a silver necklace to a gold. Always. I just prefer silver jewelry. I prefer silver. It's more valuable to me. And so every one of us has those things that are different for each of us. And actually, a staff member reminded me that it isn't even so binary. It's actually more of a continuum, and it's really depending on the circumstances of the day. Situational, is there a certain time that I might actually value this thing more than another, but it swaps and switches. And I think this is important as a reminder as you have these conversations, because, a great reflection for me is that with the exception of one person that's not here today, that would normally be a panelist, none of us are in positions that fall under that valued category. None of us are doing that work. I'm not doing that work. I'm not that core public safety professional, but I think the work I do is valuable, and I think the work that you do is valuable. And I say this because I don't think you understand the ramifications necessarily of these conversations on morale and recruitment and retention and just sort of what I'm hearing in the organization. So with that, I know that was, let's see what you think about that and we'll move on. That was my last slide.
Thank you, City Manager, for that presentation and for all of the work that has gone into moving us to this point and putting together that material today. I will now open up the floor for council discussion. Councilor Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mayor. Someone has to go first with this discussion. So thank you, City Manager, for that very clear presentation. I very much appreciate the sort of grounding in the clear decisions we have to make. And I want to recognize and understand the impact that these conversations are having on the staff of the city and the community members in the city. Because for people who value these services, for people who rely on these services, for people for whom this is their job, casual conversation, I won't say casual conversation, speculative conversation about, are they going to lose the service they rely on? Are they going to lose are they going to lose their job? Is scary. And I think we owe it to those community members to make some clear decisions within the next few weeks so that we can help our constituents, our residents, our staff have some of that better certainty in what is a very scary time for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. With that, we sort of have three scenarios on the table to discuss on the 10th. One is the fire fee, whether we want to pass the fire services fee. If we make that choice, we are looking at less severe cuts. And I would prefer that we make that decision before we get into the weeds of this scenario, that scenario. The scenarios will give us the information that we would need to say, is this fire fee worth it, right? Without deciding like a specific scenario, we can say, like, do we think the fire fee is worth it? And that, I think, will help our community members who are watching this conversation have a little bit of that certainty. Because I think if we start going into, like, do we prioritize or value this or that before we've made that core decision, that's gonna be difficult for a lot of folks. So thank you. That was what I had.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. Manager, I want to say thank you for the presentation, and I certainly understand the point that you've made with the importance of morale, both from the standpoint of people who rely on services, but certainly from the people who deliver them that we ask to do the work of the city. It has been my proposition for a long time and remains that a lot of councilors, mayors through time have, with nothing but the absolute best of intention, kind of expanded what we believe is the mission of the city and the services that we should provide beyond a sustainable level to the revenue base that we take in. And that's what we're grappling with, at least from my perspective, is that we don't have the sustainable revenue base for all the things we'd like to be able to do. And so that's why we have these choices right now. And I wonder, just on a separate note, because it seems like we may come down to that decision certainly by the 10th of the fire fee or not. Is the city attorney on the call on the Zoom chat here?
Yes.
I wanted to ask a question I didn't understand in the initial presentation of this months ago. because we're determining fire fee by at least a portion of it by square footage of one's residence or one's business. Tell me how that legally differentiates from the manner in which assessed value is determined for property taxes. I mean, I'm not a tax attorney, but legally, how is it that we can call it a fee and not be subject to property tax compression?
It is, it's not how the fee is calculated, but upon whom it is being charged. It is not a property owner-based fee. It is based on the utility holder and all of those things. So when you have a property tax is assessed against the owner of real property, and that is not the way the fee is structured and the manner in which it would be charged. And based on the direction from council, we were very deliberate and specific to make sure that the fee is done consistent with our limitations around fees versus taxes and all of those. So, but the easiest and the bottom line answer to what I believe you're asking is it's around who it's assessed against.
So in other words, if one owns a rental property, one isn't going to be assessed this fee, but the renters would have to pay it in their utilities.
It is, yes, it is who receives the bill, and that will be who is getting the utility bill. And that differs from property to property, but it's not every owner gets the fee, gets the bill like a property tax would.
Okay, you've answered my questions. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So this is my 28th budget that I've gone through this. All but a handful of those have been cut budgets. And every single time we go through it, and sometimes more than others, there's a lot of angst that goes along with it when you're making cuts. Because as Sarah rightly points out, it's not only about the staff's jobs, which is their livelihood, but also how it's going to be done creates a lot of angst within staff, but it also creates anxiety and angst within the community. People who use those services, is the library going to be cut or is fire going to be cut? And then also if you're thinking about imposing any kind of fee or raising some kind of revenue on those who pay. And so there's enough angst to go around, and it's pretty. We've done it many times before. I don't think there's a good way to avoid it. I think the path that we've gone on this time was kind of an unfortunate path. I do understand we need to make a decision by the 10th, and I'm prepared to do that. And I agree with Councilor Kuczynski that the thing that we should put up first is, are we going to do a fire fee or not? If we are not, if we say yes, then we're kind of done. If we say we're not going to do it, then we have to go through this cuts discussion. And I guess the question for city manager is, what does that process look like? You mentioned that you're prepared to put forward a budget, and you need to put together a budget, and so you take. It was kind of like option 3 of the conversation we had before, which is what you feel is in the best interest of the organization, and taking into consideration all those things. I think, Sarah, you recalled it, the do my job option. How does that actually play out if we don't vote for a fire fee on the 10th?
Well, it'll get a little bit awkward, because you'll start having, if you decide you want to continue talking about priorities, and that's continuing, we'll build the budget based on what I already said, existing priorities. Your conversation will inform us. So if we get to the place where the proposed budget that will be not in alignment necessarily with your new priorities, we'll have to amend it. So that will be getting built, and I'll be thinking like, okay, we're going to have to change that. I can't remember the timing of how we did it with COVID, but the proposed budget was out, and then we had all of those major changes to revenues that required us to come back. And so it overlapped a little bit, but that's what would happen. It would overlap.
Yeah, right. Because I don't see us going through that process very quickly on the 10th to get you need to build the budget. And so I think we'll have to, if we go down that route, then we'll have to, each of us have to talk about what we want to see and how we want to see it, and whether or not we want to hold police and fire harmless and take an extra $7 million out of everybody else in the general fund, which is parks and recs and library and planning and central services. And I guess we're going to have that conversation if we vote no on the fire fee. But I agree that we should have that up first.
And those, you're going to get those scenarios sort of like, this is these are the areas that are at risk with both of those scenarios. You're going to get that on the 10th. So you're going to have a good idea of what's really at risk.
Yeah. Specifically. Yeah. Thanks.
Councilor Leach.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, City Manager. And I know we're frustrated about this kind of extended timeline, and thank you so much for the work that you and all the city staff have done to prepare this information for us, to make us feel a little more prepared. I was, our last work session, definitely did not want to extend this process further, but here we are. And to kind of respond to Councilor Clark's, yes, we all would love to be able to provide all of the city services that we, need to, and to protect and serve our community within the current system. But the problem is that the system is broken. Our property tax system is entirely, unreasonable for the current needs in every community across Oregon. It's primarily based on rates from 1995, and the valuation and the way that it's calculated is not meeting our needs. And so every city across Oregon is now, having similar conversations because it's not meeting anyone's needs. And many, many jurisdictions are moving forward or have already moved forward with similar fees. And it is not something I want to do, anyone really wants to do, but we have to make these decisions based truly on the health and safety of our community. So I am prepared to vote in favor, if there's a motion that's going to be on the table for the fire fee on the 10th, I am prepared to help move that forward, and then continue to have conversations around, if we have to, what these additional cuts would look like. So that's where I stand. I want to be super clear about that. And thank you.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Leach, I appreciate your point of view. I really do. I'm not sure I agree with you about the system being broken. I think that the people of Oregon made a decision about what restraints we would have to live within. And so to sit at this table is a hard job as a result. But I think the people that we serve were very clear about what they would and would not accept in terms of the cost of things. And so I don't necessarily, I wouldn't characterize the system as broken, as the system is the will of the folks who live here. So my question is for the city attorney, because we've talked a little about what would and could happen in the case of instituting this fee. I think it's a very bad idea. I have said so in the past and will continue to say that I think it has short-term and long-term consequences, both revenue consequences and consequences within the community. My question to the attorney, if a signature drive were gathered to reverse the council's decision if hypothetically the council majority decided to impose this fee. Can you talk about the timelines that would necessarily follow and how that applies to the calendar year that we're dealing with both this and next budgets? What would be the soonest someone could? Yeah, and the city recorder there, thank you. I just saw you come on, Kate. What are we talking about for timelines that someone would have to or would be limited to for collecting signatures to reverse or to put our decision on a ballot? And when would that ballot be able to take place or likely take place?
So I'll speak to the very first question, and then I will turn it over to City Recorder Katie to answer the timing of the election, and with the expectation she'll also correct me if I get the first part wrong. So if you adopt an ordinance establishing the fee, then through the referral process, signature collectors would have 30 days. And if within those 30 days they collect the required number of signatures to put it on the ballot, so when there is no ability to collect signatures to reverse it, they would collect signatures to place it on the ballot. If they were able to do that, then the ordinance would not go into effect. And then you would be waiting for the outcome of the election.
And how many signatures is that? Just as a side note.
I can answer that. Right now, the referendum process is 5,817 valid signatures.
Okay, thank you.
And Katie, can you then speak just to the timing of everything else? Because I think you have those dates. Thank you.
Sure. So to qualify for the May election of this year, they would have had to have had their signatures validated by February 19th, Counselor. However, there is a code provision that allows council, if the signatures are collected and validated within a specified amount of time, and I can talk about that. There is a exception in your code, section 2.981, that talks about how council can choose to place a referendum earlier or later for a special election. And so the hard deadline is it can't be sooner than 66 days after I certify the election, or sorry, certify the results of the signature collection.
Yeah.
So that is March 15th, would be the 66 days before the election in May. But you also have to build back time for the county. So the county gets 15 days to review signatures. And then I need a day behind the county to make sure that everything that's been submitted to me is in proper form. So it's a little bit of math, and I can try to get you close, but I would say it would have to be that last week in February, early last week in February, in order to be able to qualify and meet all of those deadlines.
For a May ballot, but a special election could take place after May, and that's really what I'm driving at question-wise. And it would be the council's determination if adequate signatures were turned in and verified, that we could then choose the date of an election after that?
So it would still be a special election in May because it's an odd year. If we hit the May election of this year, there is a cost splitting that happens with the special districts, whereas a unique special election that only we are running, we would absorb the full cost. And I'd have to look more at code about your other question, or city attorney can potentially help with that.
I'm just asking about timing and not about cost in this case.
Yep.
And just for clarity, I just want to make sure we're answering your very specific question, Councilor Clark. If the council was to act in February, and the significant number and the appropriate number of signatures were collected within the 30 days,
Yeah.
it would not be on the May election.
Right. Thank
Okay.
you. That's what I was looking for. And it would be council's determination of when.
Yes, unless you waited for the next.
The reason I'm asking all these questions with my last 17 seconds, I will say, is because I'm aware of people who are getting ready to be able to put this petition out if we choose to pass this. And so it's a very real reality that we will face. And so I just want my colleagues to be aware of that. Thank you.
Councillor Ye.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I appreciate it. I think we're always aware that it's not that difficult to get something on the ballot. So I think that's a constant issue in this town and shouldn't keep us from doing what we need to do in either direction, right? That's just a reality of our system, and people can exercise their rights should they choose to do so. I want to echo what other councilors have said, that I think it is vitally important that we make the decision about the fire fee at the beginning rather than wasting precious time arguing about cuts before we make that choice. I think Councillor Kaczynski said getting into the weeds, and I feel it's probably going to feel a little bit like that once we start having those discussions, because we all have different values, like the city manager spoke about, and we all feel very passionate about those values, and it's not going to be an easy nor quick process to work through what cuts might be appropriate, whether that's 11.5 or 3.5. They're going to both be very difficult, I'm sure. So I would, like I said, not be interested in getting into that discussion until we make the important decision about whether we're going to do a fee or not. I also want to thank the city manager for being very open and honest with us. So sometimes we need that little bit of blunt reinforcement that sometimes, timelines are easy to get away from you, especially on these really important decisions where you really want to get it right. And so like bringing us back and being like, all right, these are really firm deadlines and I need you guys to focus is very appreciated, at least for me. And also I think for the public to understand what we're dealing with in the timelines where we need to make these decisions. I'm not sure how to be super helpful tonight. We're not all here. We're not making any decisions. It seems like a waste of time to be arguing about a bunch of stuff or advocating for a bunch of stuff. But I really do. I'm looking forward to our February meeting, and I am extremely thankful to all of our staff who have been working on these different options that we have asked for. I know it's a lot of work, and I appreciate the time they're putting into it.
Thank you, Council. I do not see any other councilors in the queue. And so I'm just going to make a brief couple of comments on my own on this discussion. Being a new member of these meetings and working with council and with city manager as your mayor, it's an interesting experience to come into a couple of years of process. This work dating back to budget committee conversations in 2022. To bring us to a decision point now in early 2025. And thank you, staff, for your work to help us get to a decision point, even if, as it's putting people under a lot of pressure to do very good work under a constrained timeline. I want to say a few things that I've heard that have been enlightening to me in this process, and also ask the city manager to correct this first understanding if it is wrong. City manager, from what you've described and shown in your presentation today, had we not, as a city, put forward a budget committee and council put forward a budget that included the $20 million in reductions, we would be looking at a budget gap of closer to $31.5 million right now. Okay, thank you. I think you said correct, but I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I mean, I said correct, but I mean, the math is right, but we wouldn't have been able to sustain that because we don't have enough. We wouldn't have had enough reserves to get us here.
Thank you.
We had enough to get us with the 8.3.
Thank you. I wanted to clarify that because I think one of the things that's lost in this timeline is the work that has gone into cutting and as I sometimes say, the sharpening of pencils along this process. Another quick question to follow up on a comment that Councillor Leach made, and City Manager, I've heard you reference in other public community conversations, this fire fee, other jurisdictions, the concept of this, is this something that the City of Eugene is piloting? Or I believe I heard Councillor Leach say that this is an approach that other jurisdictions have taken to try to address emergency services and critical needs in community when revenues and expenses just don't line up with inflation relative to our property tax increases.
Yeah, you're correct. We've previously shown a map of Oregon with the different cities and counties that have implemented fees for public safety and for parks.
Okay.
So we're definitely not at the beginning of the pack. I think Medford was the first multiple years ago.
Thank you. I was thinking Medford was the first, which important context, I think. Two more quick questions with my remaining 55 seconds. The first is dating back to a slide I believe we saw on the 15th relating to FTE at the City of Eugene. Believe that was a downward trend over this last 15 years and that we're at the lowest full-time employment that we've had at the City of Eugene in that time. Is that correct?
We're at the lowest. The slide that I showed that we have the lowest amount of FTE in the general fund per thousand of population that we've ever had. So that trend line has been going down.
Okay.
Our population has grown and we have not kept pace with that.
Great. Thank you. And then my last question, because I was trying very hard to explain this succinctly in a conversation last Friday with Oregon Public Broadcasting. Related to this conversation, our general fund is about $390 million, and currently about 60% of that $390 million, which is close to $240 million, is dedicated to our emergency services, to fire and police. Is that correct? Okay. I think that's important context for the community to have, and anyone who's paying attention to this conversation. Councillor Clark, I see you back in the queue.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your comments on this too. I just wanted to ask City Manager, based on the questions I was asking before, how does this affect your ability to throw a 25 to 27 budget together if this council votes in a fee and it gets its 5,000 signatures to put it on a ballot? That's a question we won't be able to answer until somewhere in probably June. So how would that affect the process of the creation of a new budget?
Yeah, I think we would, if you made the decision on February 10th, we would assume the revenue. If the signatures get collected and the ordinance doesn't go into effect, then we would have to come up with some other emergency measures to make reductions that that were easy to restore, because we wouldn't be able to sustain that over. It depends on how long of a time we're in kind of limbo land, and then if the fee goes down, then we're making those reductions, and I think that's kind of the simplicity of it. It's because we're compressed. If there was more time, we could do an amended budget, but if it's June, we're too far into that.
But we would be restricted from spending or collecting or counting on those fees until at least June, correct?
Yeah, honestly, we haven't talked about the fire fee in a while. We haven't gone through we've shifted gears, but as you might recall, it's not like if you enact this ordinance, there's some time that's going to go into figuring out how to do the mechanics of it. We don't have a full agreement yet with eWeb. So that fee will not start being collected on July 1. We're going to have a little bit of a lag. We're going to have to bridge that anyways. So it depending on when you get those signatures and it's on the ballot and it's a yes or a no, we'll have to adapt to that. And I can give you more information about how we would do that on the 10th.
Yeah, I'm just asking the question just because I I don't support us doing that. I think that puts the public safety payroll tax funds in grave jeopardy in the future. And for a number of other reasons, I don't think it's a good idea for us to do that. And I'd be in favor of us moving forward to start talking about comparative ways and values, as you suggested, in this meeting, so that we could start framing up what does the long-term budget reality look like. And I'm sorry that my colleagues at the table today do not want to do that.
Councilor Ye.
Yeah, something the city manager said made me want to ask a question. Do you believe that whether we end up cutting 3.5 or 11.5 or some other number that we end up with, do you see those services or jobs being replaced in the foreseeable future?
Well, it'd be hard to replace if there wasn't a new revenue source.
Right.
Yeah.
No. I guess my point is, my assumption is these cuts are not a 1 year or 2 year. We just need to get through this time. This is a long-term loss that we're looking at, right?
If it's an 11.5 million cut and we reduce that with no new revenue, you will not generate enough revenue in the out years to recover that, because your costs will continue to grow faster than your main revenue sources. You haven't built in a utility model for fire. So those costs are going to continue to grow and you won't be able to meet them. So you're always going to be sort of right back in here. So,
right.
Yeah.
So you would imagine that we would just be constantly having to find more cuts in the future? I mean, I guess, do you think this is the last time we're going to have to be having this conversation? Historically, the answer is yes. We're going to have to be, like, if you look at the graph, it says on the average, we're always cutting. So
yeah,
we should assume that this round, whatever it ends up being, is not the last time we're going to be looking at places to cut. Should we not find other revenue sources?
Correct. I think you're right about that. It's hard for me to speculate too much, but I think, based on what we have seen, our average growth over the last 10 years and our average cost over the last 10 years, it's hard to imagine that you get out of that delta, which is why when I proposed the fire fee, we proposed it as a special revenue fund, that all of those funds are actually dedicated to fire, so that if you do end up in a cut mode in the next biennium, you're actually not using that fund
right
to backfill anything else. It's dedicated to that.
It's protected from. So essentially, we can't touch it even if we wanted to. I mean, we'd have to get rid of the fee.
That would be that's my recommendation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. I just wanted folks to have a little bit longer term illustration of what we're looking at.
And I want to just make one other clarification, because when the mayor was asking me about the number, the general fund number and the percent, a reminder that the 393 that you're talking about is actually a biennial number and the 11.5 is an annual number. So Councilor Evans brought that up before, but we sometimes mix and match those a little bit.
Thank you, City Manager, for that clarification. Very important for us to have. Councilor Evans.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And you'll have to excuse my video. I don't have a curtain behind me. So I want to go back to 2 points, one that Councilor Ye made and Councilor Clark has made. One of the things that we cannot do is look at this in terms of our budget in isolation of other things that are impacting our residents. We are going to see a significant increase in e-web rates coming up. We are going to have to come back in 2027, and we're going to be looking at the CSI that's going to go out to the voters, and that is going to be up for renewal. we're at a point where we're hitting tax fatigue with a lot of our residents. And the people that I've talked to about the fire fee and what is going on with the budget, folks are saying, we really can't handle this anymore. The cost of living is out of control. So we're going to have to make some real hard choices, I think, about what services we are delivering, and then also looking at how we deliver services and how we can move forward with a different service delivery model that is going to be cost conscious as well as efficiency conscious in terms of how we deliver those services. So I know we don't have time to do this right now, but I'm really, thinking that we need to take a longer, more comprehensive view of what we are doing as a city, what do we have to do as a city, versus things that we would like to do that we're currently doing that maybe we can look at a different model for service delivery and being able to create efficiencies out of that. Because we're not going to get anywhere where everybody's got their own pet departments and projects and saying you can't cut me, and we just need more money. That ultimately is not going to work. And Councilor Clark is right. We are going to get major pushback. And the last thing we need is to have somebody take this to the ballot and say, okay, City Council, you pass the fire fee. We don't like it. We can't afford it. And you're going to have to go back to the drawing board and figure out something else. I'd rather not be put in that position.
Thank you, Council. And I think our discussion on this topic is coming to an end, is winding to an end, unless there are any other comments people would like to have today or add today. Okay, with that, conclude our first topic on today's agenda and remind everyone that we will be back at a decision point meeting on February 10th with this topic, and a lot of work happening between now and then. I'm going to turn things back over to our city manager to introduce the second topic.
Thank you, Mayor. Our second topic is actually about priorities too. It's your 2025 legislative priorities, and I'm joined here with Ethan Nelson, our Intergovernmental Relations Manager, and he's going to walk us through this talk.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Ethan Nelson, and I'm going to share my screen. All right. Everyone's seeing this as in a presentation view? Perfect.
Hi, Ethan. We're not seeing it in presentation. Oh, now we are.
Yeah.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor Knutson and city councilors. I'm Ethan Nelson, City of Eugene Intergovernmental Relations Manager. For those listening in, which means I support the advocacy efforts to accomplish Eugene's policy and funding goals at the state and federal level. Today, we will walk through the IGR program goals, the IGR process, the 2025 policy framework, our 2025 state priorities, touch briefly on our upcoming federal United Front efforts, and wrap up with a discussion. Specifically, we're asking council to take action on the two items provided in your packet today, the 2025 Eugene state and federal policy document, and the 2025 Eugene state priorities. These goals provide direction for the efforts of the IGR program. Approaching relationships with local, state, and federal partners in an enhanced manner to grow and leverage partnerships through greater engagement of agencies and elected officials. Second one, we participating in larger policy discussions at national and state level. For instance, former Mayor Venice testified for the U.S. Congress related to the reauthorization of the Brownfields Redevelopment Act. And more recently, she participated in key state work groups that developed statewide investments in climate action and shelter policy. We continue to engage the Eugene State Delegation to collaboratively advance community investments via their leadership roles. Fortunately for Eugene, we have senior legislators in Salem that advocate for our interests. Eugene continues to be supported on our funding and policy asks by these dedicated legislators. For the 2025 session, local legislator key appointments include District 14 Representative Fahey as the Speaker of the House, District 13 Representative Nathanson as the Chair of House Revenue and co-chair of the Joint Tax Expenditures and the Joint Legislative Information Management and Technology Committee, and importantly, a member of the Capital Construction Subcommittee of the Joint Ways and Means. Newly elected District 8 Representative Fragola is the Vice Chair for the Higher Education and Workforce Development Committee, and also the only member, the local member on the Housing and Homelessness Committee. Newly elected District 12 Representative Harvick is the only local member on the Behavioral Health and Healthcare Committee. District 4 Senator Prozansky is the chair of the Judiciary Committee and the vice chair on the Joint Committee on Addictions and Community Safety Response Committee. District 7 Senator Manning is the Senate President Pro Tem and chair of Committee of the Senate Veterans Emergency Management Federal and World Affairs Committee. And District 6, Senator Hayden is the vice chair for the Healthcare Committee. So that gives you a good sense of how we're being represented across a wide spectrum of topics by our delegation, which is, we're very fortunate for that. A little bit about the IGR process. As was shared in previous IGR-related work sessions, the IGR committee operating agreements included in Resolution 5387 provide direction on how the City of Eugene sets state and federal policy priorities and directs city resources on high priority items to be reviewed and approved by the Council's IGR committee. Current IGR committee members include Councilor Evans, Councilor Groves, and Councilor Ye. The mayor serves in an ex officio role, attending meetings as a non-voting member. The IGR committee meets regularly, generally on a monthly basis, with the ability to hold special meetings during the legislative session. IGR committee meetings are posted on the city's website and open to the public via Zoom and or in person, or we hold them in person. And more information on the IGR committee and testimony provided on priority bills can be found on the IGR program webpage, which is right off of the city manager's homepage on our city website. As a reminder, increased communication efforts with council were included in the operating agreements and from the 2023 update. And those include regular updates to council from the IGR chair during items of interest, including approved IGR meeting minutes in council packets, and then also weekly priority bill email updates from the IGR manager during legislative sessions. And so that'll start this week. Legislature started this week, and so I'll start sending those on out. The 2025 Eugene State Priorities document outlines the proactive policy and funding items which the city will advocate for in advance of and during the 2025 legislative session. And the Eugene State and Federal Legislative Policy document serves as the framework for the city's positions on introduced bills during the upcoming long session. And at your December 24th meeting, or at the IGR's December 24th meeting, they approved both documents and sent these to City Council for review and discussion with the recommendation to approve for the 2025 session. So that's what we're looking at today. And I see, Councilor Clark, your hand, and I think we're going to probably get to discussion at the end there, just to acknowledge that. So the policy document, in preparation for the 25 session, which actually is going to run January 13th through June 29th. Legislators were sworn in on the 13th, but then yesterday was the first day of committee hearings. Staff from across the organization contributed to the updated legislative policy document, and it serves as the framework, providing clear direction on the city's policy positions on both priority topics, for example, local control, and on pertinent or emerging issues. This is critical importance to clearly support our state and federal advocacy efforts in an efficient and timely manner. 2025 version of the policy document hasn't changed much from the previous year, so a lot of that just continues to move forward in direction from council in that way. And it was last approved by the full city council in December of 2023 as we led on into the 24 session. The document does not encompass all adopted city policy, the focal areas identified on this slide cover much of what our city does and is pertinent to the state and federal level. In times when we don't have clear guidance on a specific bill, the IGR team will consult with the city manager and executive managers for direction and, as necessary, bring items to the IGR committee for deliberation and guidance. If required, the IGR committee may direct staff to bring items to the full city council for deliberation. An example of this is the 2 policy items that are scheduled for discussion later this month related to the bills that would repeal HB 3115 from the 2021 session, and also a bill banning rental application screening charges statewide. On your January 29th work session, we'll be seeking council's direction on those 2 policy items. So really taking into account your feedback in previous work sessions over the years in terms of bringing items to council that have got major impact for discussion and direction. Related to the City of Eugene's 2025 state priorities, the second document in your packet that we seek approval from you today is the State of Oregon priorities, including 6 different initiatives, and we can see those on the screen here, and we'll dive on into those in just a second. Consider the priority document as a proactive what Eugene wants, while the previous document clarifies our position on legislation and bills as they are introduced. For reference, the upcoming session is roughly 6 months in length. Legislators and committees are not limited to the number of bills they are allowed to introduce, which sometimes in the short session they are. And there will likely be over 3,000 bills that are introduced this year. There were over 2,200 bills, pre-session bills released this week before the session began. And I went through every single one of those. And we are currently tracking roughly about 200 of those bills. My estimate is that in addition to the 6 priorities identified on above, we will also be tracking and lobbying on approximately 20 to 25 Priority 1 bills. Summaries of these priorities and Priority 1 bills, as well as the city's position and the status of the bill, will be included in the weekly IGR emails to council. So you probably remember that from previous years. I'll send those on out and give you a sense of where we are and kind of what's coming on up. Again, this year we have contracted with the team at CFM Advocates and will continue to be supported by Zach Reeves daily at the Capitol. And so I'm going to dive on into these 6 priorities really quickly. So where am I? All right. For the past 6 months, a work group of diverse partners from across the state came together to examine unhoused shelter services on the ground and reflect on lessons learned to define and implement a coherent, effective, and sustainable structure that will support the existing system over the long term. Mayor Venus was an integral part of this discussion, ensuring that Eugene's innovative approach to shelter would be included in the existing system structure. The work group is requesting the expansion of allowable program funding for alternative programs beyond the emergency shelter definition to include safe vehicles, parking spots, and alternative shelters. This new category is called the Safe Temporary Emergency Placement Sites, STEP as the acronym, and is being included into a forthcoming House bill on shelter. The work group also recommended that funding be allocated to a single regional partner in areas across the state, and in our area, this is likely to be Lane County as the lead regional entity. We are currently working with Lane County to request funding from the legislature and Oregon Housing and Community Services to provide full funding to Eugene-based shelters for the 25-27 biennium. The Clear Lake industrial area is in northwest Eugene between the Eugene Airport and Highway 99. The industrial area is approximately 650 acres made up of 11 different sites. The city estimates that the expansion area alone has capacity for 3,000 new jobs, but providing infrastructure to this area would actually benefit a larger area and even more job capacity, totaling around 6,000 new jobs. Eugene is requesting $10.5 million in state funds to construct the first phase of the wastewater collection system, preparing large lot industrial lands for development. Clear Lake Road project has been a City of Eugene priority in past years, but was taking a back seat to the request for housing production infrastructure during the last legislative session, which resulted in an award of $6 million for the Crow Road housing infrastructure project. State funds for phase 1 include a pump station and conveyance pipe on Enid Road, roughly around $8 million, and wastewater pipes in the north end of Enid Road and Airport Road for $2.5 million. We are also bringing roughly $2 million in local SDC funds to include in the phase 1 work, This project can be further phased as needed, and the state's lottery funding would buy down the city's share, allowing the city to move forward with this important economic development opportunity in the short term. We continue to support Lane County's request for state and federal funding to build and operate a behavioral health stabilization center. From the council work sessions this last fall on mental health and substance use disorder, this item continued to have widespread support as the most appropriate path for Eugene's legislative advocacy efforts related to behavioral health. The county currently has, and so this is a little bit of where the funding sits, which is I wanted to share with you. So the county currently has about $15.5 million on hand for the $30 million project. That includes $7.5 million in general funds, $3 million from federal sources, and about $5 million in state lottery bonds. They are requesting a reauthorization of $7.5 million in state general funds that were appropriated to the project in 2022. And also additionally, the county is requesting $7.5 million from the 2024 session that the legislature allocated as the last money in for the county's multi-use facility, which was contingent on the City of Eugene bond passing with voters. And so that money it's been appropriated by the legislature, but it has not been allocated. So it's sitting there for the end of this current biennium. Both the 2022 and the 24 funds are being requested as part of an early session budget balancing bill, which authorizes those previously allocated funds on into the next biennium, into the 25-27 biennium. With this funding, the Lane County Behavioral Health Stabilization Center will offer 24-hour urgent care for people experiencing acute level crisis, a 23-hour unit dedicated to adult behavioral health supervision, adult crisis stabilization, including intensive treatment for substance abuse, and post-acute services provided by local care teams in the days following treatment. In a separate unit, youth behavioral health, urgent care, and crisis stabilization will also be offered. The current laws related to menacing and harassment have proven not to be effective in addressing recent threatening behavior and activities toward elected officials in our area. Senate Bill 473 is a copy of Senate Bill 92 from the 2013 legislative session. Senate Bill 473 creates the crime of threatening a public official with the offense punishable by a maximum of 364 days imprisonment, a $6,250 fine, or both for the first offense, and a maximum of 5 years imprisonment, a $125,000 fine, or both for subsequent offenses. Currently, Lane County, City of Springfield, and the League of Oregon Cities are supporting this bill, with Senator Przansky as the chief sponsor and Representative Fragola as a co-sponsor. In the coming weeks, I will work to add more legislative co-sponsors and seek additional cities and local government partners for signing on to the bill. House Bill 2007 from the 2023 legislative session is being reintroduced in 2025. The bill would authorize local government governing bodies to adopt policy, ordinance, or regulation relating to possession of firearms in public building and adjacent grounds, with violations to be considered a Class A misdemeanor conviction punishable by 364 days imprisonment, $6,250 fine, or both. This bill would extend the authorities contained in Senate Bill 554, which passed in 2021, that provides for state buildings, public universities, public schools, commercial service airports with over 1 million passenger boardings per year, which includes Eugene Airport, for the ability to prohibit firearms, but did not include cities. Cities were removed from that bill in 2021 and part of the negotiations. Metro governments up in the Portland metro area is the main supporter for this effort, with Senator Lisa Reynolds being the lead sponsor. The bill will be heard in Senate Judiciary, where Senator Przansky is the chair and Senator Manning is a member. Senator Manning was a co-sponsor of this bill during the 2023 legislative session. Oregon fire districts that provide ambulance service, such as Eugene Springfield Fire, receive supplemental payments from Oregon Health Authority for ambulance services. The system is not working efficiently, and the Oregon Fire Chiefs Association is seeking revisions and improvements to the system. These improvements are being incorporated into an EMS 2.0 omnibus bill. This likely won't increase state funding for ambulance transport reimbursement, but keep the current level stable and improve the efficiency of payment requests. Eugene is supporting this as a priority due to Eugene's high proportion of GEMT reimbursement compared to other ambulance providers statewide. So while it is a statewide issue, we benefit from it greatly, and so we want to be engaged in the revisions that the Oregon Fire Chiefs Association is looking to do. And this will be kind of wrapping on up. The annual United Front delegation is scheduled for the week of April 7th. Eugene staff are working on updating the annual United Front policy book with Eugene priorities. The focus of the trip will support regional priorities and seek to build support for Eugene's upcoming fiscal year 26 congressionally directed spending requests related to police body and dash cams, airport capital construction, and an urban forestry wildfire resilience regional request. Thank you. And if you have any questions, we can get into those now. And as a reminder, the motion to approve the policy and priorities document is in the AIS. We'll stop share.
Thank you, staff. Councilor Clark, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you. Appreciate the presentation very much. I was very happy to see the ask for finishing the work on Clear Lake Road and the industrial capacity that the utilities put in the ground will provide in that area. I was happy to see us pass, or the legislature passed the Crow Road funding that they did in the last session, but with housing being such a high priority and prior to the Crow Road funding, I remember our housing planning folks talking about how 48% of the buildable lands in the city of Eugene are not buildable by virtue of no access to utilities. So my question is, why isn't an additional ask of the legislature for infrastructure funding for homes not a big part of this priority ask?
Thanks you, Councilor Clark. And if I just can restate the question, what I'm hearing you ask is, why do we not have housing production infrastructure as a priority? Is that accurate?
Yes. Yeah. And as the funding for it as a priority ask.
Okay. I think real briefly, I'll just give two quick responses. The first is that housing, last legislative session, housing production was and funding for municipalities was a priority for the governor and the legislature. And it came down and in terms of a discretionary appropriation. And so there was a bill that included funding for different projects. We were lucky to be included in that bill and had $6 million allocated to us. What's moving forward this year is a request from the governor's office to establish a programmatic allocation ostensibly on a biennial basis to a state agency. It could either be to OHCS or it could go to Oregon Business Development or Business Oregon for housing related infrastructure funds to local governments. And so right now, we would support that because in your policy document, it says, it's got statements related to, we support the state's investment in housing production and incentives. And so I think that there's a pathway for housing infrastructure that instead of it being a discretionary request, it's going to be more programmatic. And I think that's where that's going to rest. We'll still advocate for it. And the reason I think that we have a limited cap on what we can ask for financially as the city, and also as recognizing that our legislators get requests from all of the local governments and partners in the area for discretionary funding on a regular basis. And so we were really trying to balance out the need for housing infrastructure, but also bring forward an item that had been identified in the council's strategic plan under urgent community needs, economic development lands that will help attract business, and then in the long term help with that tax base to bring in revenue.
And I agree with those priorities, and I can see my friend Alan with his hand up. So I want to be very clear that I think it is, in fact, the developer's job to develop and pay for utilities as they are close into a development, but obviously large-scale public utilities are the public's responsibility, and that's why I made the ask about our responsibility to do that part about making the buildable lands buildable that we already have listed. Great point about the multitude of priorities. There's another one that leads me to this question. Our mayor, excuse me, I apologize, Mayor Knudsen. Our former mayor was fond of saying that homeless services and shelter issues, although the county's responsibility, we end up as the emergency room, she used to like to say, and so we have to do a larger share of that work than we are allocated in state responsibilities. I wonder why it is we will be asking for more and more and more of that work that should be the county's job, when in fact it seems we're going to have to argue with the county and fight with them about money that would go to them from the state in order to try and get it for us. Don't we end up with a zero-sum game there that the county loses every time we win on that front?
Councilor Clark, if I can restate your question, just to make sure I'm tracking this, is that your question is, if we're asking for funding from the state for shelters that the city operates, does that negatively impact the counties?
Close enough.
Okay. Potentially, I think that where we are right now, and this was the focus of the Sustainable Shelter Work Group, was heretofore there had not been a statewide programmatic framework that had been set up in statute that would say this is how the state's going to take on shelter. And so what our advocacy, which had been directed by council, was to expand eligibility for the types of programs that the state would fund. Because heretofore, the state was not directly funding or the types of programs that the city was funding were even eligible for state reimbursement, whether that came directly to us or to the county. So we are expanding that. And then secondarily, the work group put forward the recommendation that that funding would happen to a regional entity. And so I think that where we are right now is that the policy discussion that will likely be codified into the statute will be a new expansion of services, and also the recognition that these regional entities need to be the ones that are receiving funds and then being accountable for those funds and the outcomes that are tied to those funds. In this case, it would likely be Lane County, and we would be working collaboratively with Lane County to accomplish those goals. So I think that we're shifting into a new framework, a program framework that will ideally change the discussion to get out of that zero-sum situation that you were alluding to.
I've heard some discussion at the county that our efforts take away from what they're doing, and I would really like to strongly urge that not to take place in the efforts that you make at the Capitol, that we not get a benefit at the cost of Lane County's.
Thank you, staff, and also Councilor Clark. Councilor Zelenka, I see your hand up, and I just want to flag a time check for the group. That was an extensive back and forth, lots of helpful information there. But we have just over 10 minutes remaining in our meeting today, and some motions that we will hope to get to. So if I could ask council, interrupting mid-round, to try to keep it to a minute if there are more questions, and that'll give us time to wrap things up.
And I'll just tag on to that same for Ethan. We'll try to narrow it a little bit.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. I guess my question's for Mike. I was a little unclear about what you were talking about. Are you suggesting that we shift there'll be a shift in who pays for infrastructure expansion, which has been the longstanding process that developers pay for that when they do their developments, and to one where they no longer pay for a big portion of that major expansion, and that the public starts to pay for that. So it's a cost shift away from developers onto the public. And I guess you said major. I don't know what major minor means.
Let me calm your senses with that, brother. No, I'm not advocating for a cost shift there.
Oh, okay, good. Because that would be pretty.
I'm advocating for that which the public has the duty to do, and we haven't done for a very long time.
I guess we'll have to have a different conversation about what that means and what our duty is. But on the homelessness issue, and then I'll make a comment about that, and then I'll make motions, Mayor, since the leadership's gone. I'm senior. Mike, you're second senior, so you have the second duties. On the homelessness issue, I've long said that homelessness is lack of affordable housing, lack of mental health, and lack of substance abuse, and we really cannot do this alone. We need to have the state provide funding and leadership in doing that. So all of our policies that help us get there with the partnership with the state is going to be very much appreciated. With that, I'll make a motion to adopt the 2025 Eugene State and Federal Policies document and the 2025 Eugene State Priorities document as approved by the IGR Committee.
Second, due to form.
Thank you. Any additional comments from council? Then I will take a vote for this motion. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in favor. All opposed? 1. And the motion passes with a vote of 5-1. Thank you all very much. We've managed to do it. This concludes our agenda for today. Thank you, staff, for all of the information that was shared in this work session. We look forward to the next one. And with that, I will now close our January 22nd, 2025 City Council work session. Thank you.